or Old Fez, which is actually New York. Bethlehem, as I mentioned, is actually Pittsburgh. And Idumea, or Edom, is Virginia. Now, we've learned about the ruddy, pale-skinned man, or the so-called, the true red man, who basically settled in Virginia, and is actually where they were, how shall I say, immured in the penal colony for a time. But nonetheless, Idumea was actually Edom, and as you know, Edom means red or ruddy. So, as I said, principally between this war took place between the brutish Moors of Brutium, hence is one of the reasons why they were named brutish. And then you had the brutish or British amalgamated Moors of England. And these two factions were actually warring with the Albion, or so-called English subject male. And so, as I said, you had the two factions of Moors that were called brutish. And they were called brutish or British because of a covenant that they had between one another, or between the two families, as it were. Hence is where you get the term Brit or Brit, which means covenant, from the ancient Moabite in Hebrew. And we see evidence of this in the January 23rd, 1721 treaty between the Moors of the amalgamated Moors of England. Now, just to backtrack for a minute, I talked about Comassakumkanit, Cape Cod Bay, Massachusetts, and the Bornstone, which, as I said, is an ancient legal document dating back to about 500 BCE, and this gets into, again, the whole land title issue. I also cover this, or talk about this, in Libretto 2 of the Consecrated Talisman, which is an absolute land conveyance document that's documented or recorded or archived in Homeland Security. It's in the Royal Archives of the Medina Sidonia family in Spain, Latino. It's also in the Department of State, etc. But anyway, this particular document, Libretto 2, is titled Geográficas para materia que familiae annalis Imperium Morosium ac Gentilisio Sanguinis, which is the Great Geodetic Survey and Family Chronicle of the Moorish Empire and its blood right heirs, which basically is a survey, a global survey, again, geodetic survey of the entire globe, giving you the metes and bounds, etc. And this document is to be used in conjunction with the Bornstone. Now, what's very interesting about that is also as to how we've been conditioned or trained to see things, is we think of these ancient monoliths, pyramids and things like that as artifacts, which is a term, a popularized term that's used by so-called archaeologists, grave robbers, whatever you want to call them. But these things are actually legal documents and should be used in every and all instances concerning so-called claims to land. And I say so-called claims because claim is actually a legal term, but in terms of asserting rights, birthright, inherited rights to the land, these particular monoliths, structures, etc., should be used as legal documents, because in fact they are. Treaties between the Moors of Marrakesh and the Moors of Holland in the 1600s, like 1610, 1653, 57, 58, and many of these treaties, believe it or not, are still in force, as quiet as it may be kept. So you have treaties between the Moors of Marrakesh and the Moors of Germany, because, as you know, the European system concerning what they call Germany today didn't exist until, I believe it is, 1873, 1874. So we're talking about treaties with the Moors of Germany, Bavaria, also the Moors of Thrace, Bulgaria, Bosnia-Herzegovina, um, Albania, Serbia. All of these places were actually still a part of the, and still are actually today, a part of the Moorish Empire, but also under the Moorish Osman or Ottoman rule, which I'm going to get into in a little while in terms of the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. And what's very interesting about that is that in the 1492 period of Spain, when they talk about, the Moors falling in Spain and this, that, and the other, it was the fall of the empire, that's not accurate or completely accurate, in that the Moorish Osman Empire at that time, 1492, and even going back 50 years before that or prior to that, was expanding, as I said, all the way from Anatolia and the Crimea to as far as the Americas. In fact, the expansion after the head of Satan was taken, in fact, Prophet Ali talks about that in the 101 questionnaire. I believe it's questions 83 and 84. Where he talks about the head of Satan being taken. What's interesting about that is, I guess we can look at it, from the symbolic sense, in terms of so-called Roman rule, but actually what they call the Byzantine Empire didn't really exist. It was what is known today as Romania, Transylvania, etc. And I know Transylvania, of course, will conjure memories of or thoughts of Count Dracula, that kind of thing. And what's very interesting is that there was this part of the Moorish Empire was in 1453, around that time, was invaded by a Roman horde and led by a particular clan, the Dracul family, which was later known as Dracula, or the family of Dracula. And Vlad Dracul was Count Dracula, or actually Prince Dracula's father. And Vlad Dracul, who was a member of the Secret Order of the Devil, a so-called secret society, they were the leaders of this particular Roman horde who had invaded this part of the Moorish Empire. And so, shortly thereafter, you had what has become known in history as the Ottoman Wars. And so, it was during this time, 1453, where the head of Satan was taken, and the head of Satan was actually Dracula's father, that Mehmed II, or Muhammad the Conqueror, took. And so, I think it was shortly thereafter that Prince Dracula was killed by the Moors during the war in 1462. And so, after this, as I said, what it did was that it opened up the empire beyond belief. And so it was still flourishing in many parts of the globe, as I said, all the way to the Americas, in Brutium, as well as Mauritania, Algeria, which is known to you today as Minnesota. Algeria was also known, Minnesota, its ancient name was Numidia. I know many of the Moors, like Brother Asir, had talked about the Moors being known as Numidians at one time. And prior to that, they were known as Anamim. Prior to that, they were known as Gaituli, or of the Gaitulian family. They were also known as Gadamantes. These were many of the names by which the Moors were known. They were the Paprusim, the Kastuhim. They were the Lubim, as I mentioned earlier. But as I said, this was in Numidia, which had opened up. You also had in Libya, which, as I said earlier, is Barca, Chicago. All of these areas opened up as a result of what took place in Istanbul, so-called Constantinople, 1453, believe it or not. And after this was done by Mehmed II, also known as Muhammad the Conqueror, the empire, as I said, flourished beyond belief. So I just wanted to veer off a little concerning that whole history, but I'm going to get back to the 1700s, the American Revolution era, and as I said, the beginnings of the United States Corporation.